The year is 2025 and the war in Ukraine continues to cast a long shadow over global politics. Relations between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and former US President Donald Trump have reached a new low, marked by accusations of disinformation and a war of words that threatens to further undermine diplomatic efforts to end the conflict. The once cordial relationship between the two leaders has soured, replaced by a palpable tension that underscores the deep divisions over the war in Ukraine and its implications for the international order. This deterioration in relations stems from a series of public disagreements and accusations. Zelenskyy has accused Trump of falling prey to Russian disinformation campaigns, while Trump has launched scathing attacks on Zelenskyy's leadership and Ukraine's role in the conflict. This exchange of barbs highlights the growing chasm between the two leaders and the challenges it poses to finding a peaceful resolution to the ongoing war. The breakdown in communication between Zelenskyy and Trump is particularly concerning, given the United States' influential role in the conflict. As a key ally of Ukraine, the US has provided significant military and financial aid to support Kiev's defense against Russian aggression. However, Trump's vocal criticism of US involvement in the conflict, coupled with his accusations against Zelenskyy, raises questions about the future of US support for Ukraine. The strained relationship between Zelenskyy and Trump adds another layer of complexity to an already volatile geopolitical landscape. As the war in Ukraine enters its fourth year, the international community grapples with the challenges of finding a negotiated settlement, addressing the humanitarian crisis, and navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries that shape the conflict. The public discord between Zelenskyy and Trump serves as a stark reminder of the deep divisions that persist, and the urgent need for dialogue and diplomacy to prevail. At the heart of the escalating tensions between Zelenskyy and Trump lies a fundamental disagreement over the origins of the conflict and the role of disinformation. Trump has repeatedly made claims that echo Russian propaganda narratives, suggesting that Ukraine bears some responsibility for the war, and questioning the legitimacy of US support for Kyiv. These statements have been met with sharp rebukes from Zelenskyy, who accuses Trump of amplifying Russian disinformation and undermining international efforts to hold Moscow accountable for its aggression. One of Trump's most contentious claims centers around the notion that Kiev is somehow responsible for provoking Russia's invasion. This assertion, which aligns with Kremlin talking points, ignores the reality that Russia launched an unprovoked and illegal military assault on a sovereign nation. Trump's suggestion that Ukraine shares blame for the conflict not only distorts the truth but also plays into Russia's strategy of sowing division and confusion within the international community. In addition to his claims about Ukraine's role in the conflict, Trump has also criticized the amount of US aid provided to Kiev, arguing that it is excessive and unsustainable. This line of attack resonates with his long-standing skepticism of foreign aid and his belief that the US should prioritize its own interests above all else. However, critics argue that Trump's stance on US aid to Ukraine ignores the strategic importance of supporting a democratic country facing an existential threat from an authoritarian aggressor. Zelenskyy has not minced words in his response to Trump's accusations, directly accusing the former US president of being a purveyor of Russian disinformation. He has pointed to Trump's past praise for Russian President Vladimir Putin and his skepticism of US intelligence agencies' assessments of Russian interference in the 2016 US presidential election as evidence of his susceptibility to Kremlin propaganda. Zelenskyy's strong pushback highlights the growing concern among Ukrainian officials and their international partners that Trump's rhetoric could embolden Russia and undermine efforts to hold Moscow accountable for its actions. Amidst the backdrop of escalating tensions between Zelenskyy and Trump, a new development has emerged on the diplomatic front: direct talks between the United States and Russia. Senior officials from both countries recently met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to discuss a range of issues, including the ongoing war in Ukraine, improving bilateral relations, and the possibility of a future meeting between President Biden and Putin. However, the talks have sparked controversy and raised concerns in Kyiv and among its Western allies due to the notable absence of Ukrainian representation. The decision to hold US-Russia talks without Ukrainian participation has been met with criticism from those who argue that it undermines Ukraine's sovereignty and its right to be directly involved in discussions about its own future. They contend that any negotiations regarding the war in Ukraine must include Kyiv as an equal partner, rather than treating it as a passive bystander in its own fate. The exclusion of Ukraine from the Riyadh talks has fueled anxieties that the US and Russia may be seeking to strike a deal over the heads of the Ukrainian people, potentially jeopardizing Kyiv's interests and undermining its leverage in any future peace negotiations. While the Biden administration has maintained that it remains committed to supporting Ukraine and will not make any agreements regarding the country without its direct involvement, the optics of the Riyadh talks have nonetheless raised eyebrows. The image of US and Russian officials meeting behind closed doors, without Ukrainian representation, has evoked historical parallels to the Yalta Conference, where the fate of Eastern Europe was decided by the Allied powers without the input of those directly affected. Despite the concerns surrounding Ukraine's exclusion from the Riyadh talks, the Biden administration has defended its decision, arguing that direct engagement with Russia is essential for managing the conflict and exploring potential avenues for de-escalation. They emphasize that the talks are not intended to negotiate a settlement to the war, but rather to establish a framework for dialogue and address specific issues of mutual concern, such as arms control and strategic stability. Whether these talks will yield any tangible progress remains to be seen, but their occurrence underscores the complex diplomatic dance between the US and Russia as they navigate the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. As the war in Ukraine grinds on, the country's future hangs in the balance. The conflict has already claimed the lives of thousands, displaced millions more, and left a trail of destruction across Ukrainian cities and towns. While both sides have engaged in sporadic peace talks, a lasting ceasefire remains elusive, and the prospects for a negotiated settlement appear increasingly distant. The ongoing fighting, coupled with the escalating tensions between Zelenskyy and Trump and the controversial US-Russia talks, paints a bleak picture for Ukraine's immediate future. One of the most pressing concerns for Ukraine is the potential for the war to escalate further, drawing in NATO countries and risking a wider conflict between Russia and the West. While the Biden administration has ruled out direct military intervention in Ukraine, the US and its NATO allies continue to provide Kyiv with military aid and intelligence support. However, the risk of miscalculation or accident remains high, particularly as Russia becomes increasingly frustrated by its lack of progress on the battlefield. Another key challenge facing Ukraine is the question of its long-term security. Prior to the Russian invasion, Ukraine had aspirations of joining NATO, seeking the security guarantees that membership in the alliance provides. However, the current conflict has made NATO membership for Ukraine a near impossibility, as it would trigger Article 5 of the NATO treaty, obligating the alliance to come to Ukraine's defense and potentially sparking a full-blown war with Russia. In the absence of NATO membership, Ukraine is left searching for alternative security arrangements that can deter future Russian aggression. Zelenskyy has called for legally binding security guarantees from the US and other Western powers, but it remains unclear what form these guarantees would take or whether they would be sufficient to deter Russia. The challenge for Ukraine is to find a security solution that provides a credible deterrent against future aggression while also addressing Russia's security concerns and avoiding a wider conflict.